The Integrity in Public Life Bill has finally been passed in both the lower and upper houses of Parliament. The bill would establish a regime, including an integrity commission, to promote the integrity of persons in public life and strengthen measures for the prevention, detection, investigation, and prosecution of acts of corruption. One could say that it's been a long journey, as this is in fact the third time that a Barbados Labour Party-led administration has sought to bring integrity legislation. While it has passed in the lower house on every occasion, it failed to get the required votes in the upper house up until now. It is an important piece of legislation for the country and for the BLP, as it was one of the party's major election promises. The most recent bid to get it on the statute books began on Friday, July 21st, when Attorney General Dale Marshall laid in Parliament a revised copy of the Integrity in Public Life Bill.
Mr. Speaker, this matter was extensively canvassed during 2020 when we debated the bill in the lower house and then in the upper house. History will recount, sir, that the bill was passed unanimously in the lower chamber, but that in the upper chamber, the bill was not passed. And very shortly after that, Parliament was prorogued, and therefore that bill died with that Parliament.
The Integrity in Public Life Bill 2023 shares several similarities with that of the 2020 bill. However, the AG pointed out a number of the changes made while reflecting on why the first bill did not pass.
The bill did not find favor with some of the senators because of two things. One issue which was raised fairly stridently by a few members of the then Senate had to do with the treatment of judges. In the bill as it stood then, judges were excluded from its ambit. Several of the senators called for judges to be included, and I believe, sir, that we have reached what is a reasonable compromise position. And that position is, sir, that going forward, and what is provided in this bill, is that future appointed judges will be subject to the provisions of this integrity bill, while existing judges will not be. Mr. Speaker, the other matter that was raised and complained about by the Senate had to do with a provision in the bill which said that we were going to publish certain reports. Now, Mr. Speaker, that was an unfortunate omission, if you could call it that. We omitted to remove that because that provision, I'm quite sure, was addressed during the select committee. But, sir, we produced 700 plus reports. These things happen from time to time. Regrettably, that provision slipped through. But it is clear that we've always said the privacy of individuals is paramount, and we will not make any of their declarations public. This section, that is throughout the bill. But we unfortunately included a section which went contrary to that precept, and that provision has now been taken out. So, sir, what we have today is not all that different to what we brought before the chamber, before prorogation. But we have, I believe it is fair to say, addressed the issues that largely concerned the senators on that occasion. While others might have said, the bill died, so are we done with that? This administration is made of sterner stuff. We made a commitment to the people of Barbados. We had said that we were going to pass it within 100 days. We couldn't. We didn't do it then. But we brought it, we subjected it to the most intense of public scrutiny. And so we come back to the country today to say, here it is again. There were some things that individuals didn't find favor with, and we've been humble enough to change those things where we were able to change them. This bill, sir, will be an important bulwark for the Barbadian society going forward. It is not just about the members of this House or the upper house embracing it. It is about all of Barbados embracing it.
Prime Minister Mia Motley gave her full support to the bill.
Mr. Speaker, this has been a long journey, a very long journey. And sir, this government committed itself prior to being elected to being able to strengthen both the legislative and the institutional framework to fight the cancer of corruption that regrettably had started to engulf our country. It has become popular to believe that corruption is only in high places, because that's part of the popular folklore narrative. In the same way that it is popular to believe that corruption is only in the public sector, because that is part of the folklore. But as we've always known, sir, it takes two hands to clap. And corruption fuels the interests of a party enabled by the willingness of another party. And Mr. Speaker, it is fair to say that we live in a world where this has become more and more problematic. And our government understood that we have to be able to put in place the strongest possible legislative framework, the strongest possible tools, and the strongest possible institutional framework.
She added that her government is prepared to do just that.
I want to continue to send the message that this government has not put these measures in place just as tokenism, and that there has to be a genuine appreciation on the part of all that for every dollar taken out in corruption is a dollar taken away from helping this country go forward and helping the most vulnerable in this country who may need the assistance of the state in order to stay alive.
With no opposition in the lower house, the bill passed yet again, with the unanimous support of the 24 members of parliament who were present when the vote was taken. The next step was the Senate, which had proved fatal for the bill in the past. As a result of the necessary constitution amendment, a 2/3 majority was needed, and so the bill had to be supported by more than just government senators. Leader of Government Business in the Upper House, Senator Lisa Cummings, led off the debate, explaining why senior public officials have been included. Senator Cummings says senior posts such as permanent secretaries are regarded as accounting officers and have power that in some cases not even ministers have.
These are the persons who hold the public purse. By law, no minister of government or no elected official can be an accounting officer. That is a matter of governance that I believe we need to make clear for the country. No elected official can sign a check, receive a check, sign even contracts. Oftentimes, those things are done by the accounting officer. In our overseas missions, Mr. President, you can have an ambassador, you can have a high commissioner, and they could be persons who are in the public eye at all times. They're the ones giving speeches. They're the ones meeting the foreign government officials. They're the ones engaging with the government on the other side and representing the interests of people. They cannot sign anything of an accounting nature. There is a designated accounting officer, even in our overseas missions, and that person is the most senior public official. The most senior public, not elected, public official in the embassy. The notion, therefore, Mr. President, that if by law, the power of the purse and the power of accounting is held by public officials and not elected officials, that you can have legislation that excludes said accounting officer is a misnomer. And it suggests that those who feel that way have not understood the structure of governance in a parliamentary democracy.
However, while many acknowledge that there is a need for integrity legislation, a number of concerns were raised about the bill.
The fact is, sir, these are the practical concerns. The Integrity Commission needs to have the resources to do its job. Without the resources, we're going to have a commission in name alone. Sir, the Integrity Commission is going to have the need to have independence finances. If these finances are subject to the whims of government or withdrawal of those said resources, you will have a commission in name alone. The other issue that was raised, sir, was the need for independent prosecutorial powers. As we see, sir, the current legislation requires under Section 38 that the information be sent to the DPP. We have been in here debating about the need for more resources for the DPP to do its job. It currently is dealing with the backlog of criminal cases which we spoke about, sir, and now we're saying, oh, by the way, DPP, deal with the prosecutions on behalf of the Integrity Commission.
Perhaps the most critical of the bill was independent Senator Monique Tate. While she admitted to supporting the concept of integrity legislation, she felt there was simply not enough education about the bill, particularly for those who would be impacted by it. Senator Tate proceeded to list those who would have to declare their assets and liabilities.
We've been hearing a lot about the members of the House of Assembly and the Senate, members of the Cabinet, permanent secretaries. But they're heads of department within the public service and holders of public offices in the same grade as that of such heads of department. I don't even know what that means. Then you have chairpersons of the state-owned enterprises listed in Part 3. I am going to be dealing with that. Then we have chief executive officers, general managers, and other executive heads of the state-owned enterprises listed in Part 3. Persons whose administrative head is a head of department for the purposes of this act. This is Part 2. Director of Analytical Services, Director of Barbados Drug Service, the Director of the Bureau of Gender Affairs, Chief Supply Officer of the Central Purchasing Department, Coordinator of the Children's Development Center, the Director of the Coastal Zone Management Unit, the Chief Community Development Officer of the Community Development Department. We have the Chief Archivist in there. We have the Director of the Department of Emergency Management. We have the Chief Electoral Officer, Registrar of Cooperative Department, Registrar of Cooperative Affairs. We have the Principal of Erdeston College. We have the Principal of the Government Industrial Schools. We have the Chief Media Source Officer of the Media Resource Department, the Commissioner of Land Tax, the Chief Labor Officer, the Chief Immigration Officer, the Chief Information Officer, and the Chief Electrical Officer of the Electrical Engineering Department. We have the Director of the National HIV/AIDS Commission, the Director of the National Heritage Department, the Ombudsman, the Principal of the Samuel Jackman Prescott Polytechnic, the Manager of the School Meals Department, and we have principals of secondary schools, of which I believe there are 21. The Chief Telecommunications Officer, the Director of Youth Affairs, the Chief Welfare Officer. Now to this you have to add a spouse. And then if you have dependent children, you have to add that. So on a count without putting in the 21 principals, this is 55. If you add the 21 principals, that's 76, multiplied by 3. You are at some figure that is over 200. You want me to calculate that too? No, Mr. President. This is not a joke. Those are persons who fall into part 1 of the second schedule, specified persons in public life. And I can bet you that the majority of persons that I just called out, and I didn't call out all of them, are unaware that this legislation applies to them.
Despite some reservations, the legislation passed 19 in favor and 1 against. Senator Tate was the only person to vote no. Leader of Government Business, Senator Cummings, said the bill will be the subject of extensive communication support before being proclaimed. Coming up, local watchdog organization Integrity Group Barbados Chairman Andy Armstrong joins us. Mr. Armstrong, thank you for sitting down with me.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Why is the Integrity in Public Life Bill important to your group?
Well, I think the Integrity in Public Life Bill is important because to some degree it ties everything else together. As you know, we have the Prevention of Corruption Act, we have the Whistleblower, and there's 1 or 2 others as well. But this one is really one that I think ties everything together. The key thing about this is it sets up an Integrity Commission. So the Integrity Commission will be charged to, well, receive declarations from people in public life, members of Parliament, the Senate, heads of corporations within government, and heads of departments. They have to file a declaration of their assets and liabilities with the Commission. So it won't be a public document. It will only be seen by the 5 members of the Commission and 1 or 2 other clerks. But they'll have to look at that document and decide if it looks realistic or sensible, and then they're able to investigate and ask questions if they need to have a bit more clarity. At the end of the term, so 5 years for someone in the House, they have to file again, and then they'll be able to compare and see if there have been large changes. Then they'll be able to investigate and understand why there have been changes. So that's sort of the basic function. But then the Integrity Commission is also charged in a general sense to investigate corruption. If someone complains to them, or if they see a situation which they feel needs investigating, they will have investigators assigned to them. They can investigate on their own volition. So to me, that is one of the actually strongest things about this commission, the ability to do that.
The legislation had to be amended after its predecessor was defeated in Senate back in 2020. What are your thoughts on the amendments?
Well, the amendments are important. In the future, judges, the Director of Public Prosecutions, and the Auditor General will be covered by this act. The current incumbents are not. And the rationale given by the Attorney General, which we accept, is that if they had done that, that would have changed the Constitution. And in fact, this is why they needed the 2/3 majority in the Senate, because they were changing the Constitution. So those 3 categories of people, you could change your job description, and this was seen as a fundamental change to it. The other change was, again, that the original draft had said it was going to be public, the declarations, which does happen in some, say, Scandinavian countries, but that was not the actual intention in Barbados. So the declaration will only be seen by members of the Commission.
Is the Integrity Group Barbados comfortable with that?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, a gold standard years down the road obviously is the more transparent the better. But I don't think in Barbados we're ready for that. And I think if the assets of those people were posted on a website where anybody could go and look at them, I think then we wouldn't have a lot of people coming forward. But the other thing which has happened even in Scandinavia, when you have that level of disclosure, some of those people have been targeted by criminals because they're able to look up and say, this person has all these assets, so let me go and kidnap one of their family. So I think you have to balance it, and I think what we're achieving in Barbados is good. It will be known to the members of the Commission, but not to the wider public.
We have this legislation, as well as, like you mentioned, the Prevention of Corruption Act, the Whistleblower Act, a slew of legislation. And so the primary question now is this all that is required to foster the kind of first transparency and then accountability that your organization would like to see? Or do you think that more is still required?
Well, there's two other pieces of legislation we would like to see. One would be freedom of information or open data. I was heartened because Senator Chantal Monroe-Knight in the Senate, she spoke about the fact that they're going more the route of proactive disclosure. So they're not necessarily waiting for people to ask them, but certain things like the government budget, they're trying to post that so that anybody can look and see what the government is spending the money on. So for us, that is actually better, where certain types of information, say large contracts with the government, we strongly believe those should be posted on a website where members of the public, and we're the ones who ultimately paid for those projects, can see who tendered and who was awarded the tender. And I think that would take away a lot of the suspicion that goes on now. So that's very important, either freedom of information or open data. And the other one, which we know is a much more difficult but also needed, is campaign finance reform. So it's interesting, when we were in the Senate, one of the independent senators moved an amendment to include political parties in this integrity legislation. And it was supported by all the independent senators, but by none of the government senators. And one of the government senators made the point that political parties don't exist in law. So the first thing you have to do is have an act which gives political parties a legal life.
More still needed, but this is a step forward.
It definitely is. And once we can actually set up the Integrity Commission and finance it properly, because remember, as I said, they're going to have to receive hundreds of declarations and go through those and just verify they've been filled in properly. But then they're also supposed to investigate. So if they don't get given the money to have the investigators, then they're really going to be able to only do about half of their job. So, as it is with some Auditor General is another example, and not just me, but most people in Barbados believe the Auditor General does a good job, but the Auditor General himself has been saying for years, I need more resources. So what we would hope is that the Integrity Commission, or whoever the head is, wouldn't be doing the same thing, saying, I need more resources, I need more resources. So we understand resources are scarce in Barbados, but we believe this is an important area where we need to put adequate resources behind the Commission.
Mr. Armstrong, thank you for making the time. In return, political analyst Peter Wickham weighs in on the discussion. Stay with us. Mr. Wickham, thank you for joining me.
Pleasure.
You've been following this legislation's progress for a number of years. What are your thoughts on it finally passing in the upper house last week?
Well, my first thought is I'm happy. I'm happy not only that it has passed, but I'm happy that it has passed with the support of the vast majority of senators, including the independent senators. I think that the hurdle that many of us were concerned about was not so much the intention of government, because government was committed, but what would be the independent senators. The debate suggested that while there were some reservations, the vast majority of independent senators were comfortable enough to go forward. This is, I would say, historic, because we now have for the first time Declaration of Finances legislation, and it essentially puts us in good company as far as regional governments are concerned, because very few of them have similar legislation. So I think that we are in a good place. So I'm happy about that, and I'm also happy about the fact that it has gained the support of the vast majority.
You mentioned reservations. A number of independent senators critiqued the bill in its current state. Did you have any issues with it?
It's not perfect. There are two approaches that one can take to declaration. One is you do a public declaration, which is that one where everyone knows what you have. and then you would do a comparative declaration at the next point so everyone would know what you gain. This is not that, and I think this is consistent with what is possible within a small territory, in that we make declarations to a select committee that is essentially sworn to secrecy in relation to that. So they will do the hard work of monitoring and evaluating and so on. My ideal situation is one in which there's a public declaration, because I think that that's the best thing for transparency. But I also appreciate that we live in a society where a small society like this, that kind of thing would be problematic. I also wish it were possible to include the judges, public servants, and everyone from now, because I think that the fact that you have a future intention and not a current essentially leaves a space open in relation to persons who are sitting, and many of them who are quite young as judges being appointed, that will sit for probably the better part of 10 years. Again, it's unfortunate, but I also appreciate it's consistent with what is reasonably possible within the context of our whole constitutional arrangement. So those would be some of my reservations, but at the same time, I appreciate that the important thing is that we have gotten it done, and now we are in a position to make changes as time passes to see if we can tinker with it some more. But I understand that a lot of the one could say, the less ideal aspects of it are to facilitate the peculiar situation that we have in Barbados.
Do you consider this a major political win for the Barbados Labour Party? How does this translate politically?
I would say this is a major win for Barbados. The Barbados Labour Party made this platform position from a long time ago that they wanted to do this. The Democratic Labour Party has never entrenched himself in the position. Any government that achieves transparency, any government that achieves transparency in terms of information, that achieves declaration of finances, these are the hallmarks of good governance. So I would say that it is a win for our democracy. And then, yes, it's a win for the Barbados Labour Party in as much as they're the government that can claim to have achieved it. It is, for them, even more important because they have entrenched themselves in a position that is something they intended to do, while the Democratic Labour Party never made such a promise. But certainly if the DLP were to be in office now and would have achieved this, my reaction would be the same, that it's a win for any political entity that is able to deliver this product.
Mr. Wickham, thank you for making the time.
My pleasure.
And thank you for joining me.